Welcome to Cosmic Lullaby Channel, where soothing melodies blend with the mysterious beauty of the cosmos, guiding you on a journey of relaxation and peaceful sleep. Tonight, we open with a question that has unsettled scientists for decades, and yet it has never been closer to an answer. In a world where intelligence has always been measured by motion, decision, and speed, there exists a silent majority that defies those rules: plants. They stand rooted, unable to flee, unable to chase, unable to migrate. And yet, through millions of years, they have conquered deserts, marshlands, mountain peaks, and forests, shaping the very biosphere on which all other life depends. The mystery we confront tonight is this: could plants themselves possess a form of intelligence? Not metaphorical, but measurable, demonstrable. A quiet cognition that we have failed to see simply because it unfolds too slowly for our impatient eyes. For centuries, the sciences dismissed plants as passive automatons, green machines driven only by sunlight and chemistry. But in recent decades, evidence has begun to fracture that assumption. Researchers across Europe, the Americas, and Asia have found hints of a system, a way of processing, anticipating, even remembering. If true, it changes not only how we see the natural world, but how we define intelligence itself. Because if awareness, memory, and decision-making can emerge without a brain, then perhaps cognition is not the exclusive property of animals. Perhaps it is a spectrum woven throughout life. This story begins not in a laboratory, but in the forests and fields that sustain us. Here, plants must solve the same existential dilemmas that animals do: how to find resources, how to avoid danger, how to adapt when conditions shift. But where animals solve problems with neurons and muscles, plants must solve them with chemistry, growth, and astonishing coordination across their tissues. At first glance, it seems impossible. A fox can run, a dolphin can play, a crow can solve a puzzle. But a plant? It cannot move. It cannot choose where to be born. And yet survival demands choice. That contradiction is the puzzle that modern science has begun to unravel. Part of the problem is time. We live in hours, minutes, seconds. Plants live in days, seasons, decades. Their behavior is invisible at our pace. But with time-lapse cameras, molecular sensors, and decades-long studies, we have begun to glimpse a hidden dimension. Roots probing through soil are not random, they are strategic. Leaves adjusting to light are not mechanical reflexes, they are weighted decisions, balancing competition against efficiency. Seeds delaying germination are not idle. They are reading chemical signals from the soil and calculating whether it is safe to emerge. These are not instincts alone. They are context-dependent responses. And context is the first sign of intelligence. Consider this. A plant can detect up to 20 environmental cues at once: light quality, moisture, gravity, nutrient concentration, the presence of competitors, even subtle vibrations. It does not merely register them, it integrates them, prioritizes them, and acts. This is not theory, it is data. A root that branches toward water but ignores salt is not simply growing, it is making a trade-off. In economic terms, it is conducting a cost-benefit analysis. And cost-benefit analysis has always been a hallmark of strategic thinking. This emerging perspective has divided the scientific community. Some argue that intelligence requires neurons, synapses, and a central brain. Without them, what we see in plants is only elaborate reflex. Others, however, suggest that we may have been blinded by our own definitions. Intelligence, they argue, may not be a fixed trait, but an adaptive process. The ability to acquire information, process it, and respond in ways that enhance survival. By that measure, the green world surrounding us is far more sophisticated than we ever imagined. But beyond biology, the implications stretch into philosophy, economics, even geopolitics. Forests are not only ecological systems, they are also carbon banks, climate regulators, and critical resources in the struggle against global warming. If plants operate with distributed intelligence, their survival strategies may hold lessons for our own societies. Decentralized decision-making, resilience without central command, cooperation and competition balanced in a living network. Ideas that human economies and governments struggle to perfect have been playing out quietly in the plant kingdom for millennia. And so tonight, as we dive into the hidden life of plants, we are not simply asking a biological question. We are confronting a challenge to our very definition of intelligence. Do plants think? Or have we simply failed to recognize the kind of thinking that does not resemble our own? This journey will take us from the cellular scale of chemical signals to the global scale of forests acting as collective organisms. What we find may not only change science, it may change how humanity sees itself in relation to the living world. When we think of intelligence, we imagine movement, an eagle adjusting its hunt to the shifting winds, a dolphin solving puzzles for food, even a bee navigating landscapes with memory and precision. In animals, intelligence is visible. It is tied to speed, to muscles, to the ability to act within seconds. But plants are still. The overall mood, they cannot run from a predator. They cannot chase sunlight. They cannot migrate when the soil dries. And yet, despite this immobility, they thrive. Deserts bloom. Forests endure. Crops adapt to climates that change with alarming speed. What kind of intelligence exists in stillness? This question has led scientists into controversial territory. For decades, mainstream biology rejected the very idea of plant cognition. To speak of plant memory or decision-making was dismissed as pseudoscience, even dangerous anthropomorphism. But quietly, data has begun to mount. It shows plants behaving in ways that cannot be explained by reflex alone. They do not simply react, they anticipate. They do not just grow, they evaluate. And in some cases, they even appear to remember. One of the most famous examples is Mimosa pudica, the sensitive plant. Its leaves fold when touched, a reflex thought to protect against herbivores or reduce water loss. But in laboratory studies, when researchers dropped harmless water droplets on its leaves, the plant eventually stopped closing. It had learned the stimulus was safe. Even weeks later, after being moved to new environments, the plant retained this memory. No neurons, no synapses, yet the behavior persisted. It was not fatigue, it was selectivity. And selectivity is a cognitive trait. But this is not an isolated case. In recent years, Arabidopsis thaliana, a humble flowering plant used in genetics labs, has demonstrated remarkable adaptability. Exposed to cold stress at the same hour each day, it began activating its defense genes before the stress arrived. Not reaction, but prediction. It remembered a rhythm in its environment and prepared in advance. That ability, to project the future from the past, lies at the heart of intelligence in any system, biological or artificial. The implications of these findings extend far beyond botany. If plants can learn without neurons, then intelligence itself may not be bound to brains. It may be a universal property of life, the ability to encode history, weigh context, and act strategically. And this matters in ways we rarely consider. Agricultural scientists now study plant memory to breed crops that better withstand drought and heat, critical in a world facing climate instability. Understanding how plants predict environmental patterns could mean the difference between famine and food security for millions. The geopolitical consequences are profound. Nations that control crop resilience control not only their own food supplies, but also leverage in global trade. During the 2022 food crisis, triggered by war and disrupted grain exports, countries with diversified, resilient agriculture weathered the storm better than others. If plant cognition helps unlock higher resilience, it becomes more than a scientific curiosity. It becomes a strategic advantage. The intelligence of plants, then, is not only an academic debate. It is a matter of economic security, geopolitical power, and human survival. Still, skepticism remains. Critics argue that these behaviors, while fascinating, are mechanistic, the result of biochemistry, not cognition. But even here, definitions are shifting. Computation itself, in its purest sense, is the transformation of inputs into outputs according to rules. Plants do this constantly. If water is scarce and light is abundant, then extend roots, delay leaves. If herbivores attack and nutrients are plentiful, then divert energy into chemical defenses. These are conditional, rule-based behaviors. They are logical, structured, and context-sensitive, qualities indistinguishable from basic computation. To truly understand this, we must shift our frame of reference. In animals, thought is centralized. The brain receives, processes, commands. In plants, there is no command center. A natural male narrator voice with a warm, friendly tone. Each cell is both sensor and processor. Each root tip gathers information. Each leaf adjusts to light. And together, the plant integrates this flood of signals into coherent strategies. It is not a brain. It is a network. And networks, as history shows us, can often outperform central authorities. This distributed model should sound familiar. It is the same principle guiding the internet, blockchain economies, and even decentralized political movements. Intelligence does not have to be concentrated in one place. It can emerge from the sum of many small parts acting in concert. Plants have been running this model for hundreds of millions of years. Humanity is only beginning to catch up. If plants can weigh options, anticipate outcomes, and remember experiences, then the next question becomes inevitable. Where does this happen? In animals, we point to the brain. In humans, to the cortex, to neurons firing in recognizable patterns. But in plants, no such organ exists. There is no single command hub, no central processor. And yet, evidence shows that signals move within them. Electrical impulses, chemical cascades, even waves of calcium ions that travel from root to leaf in response to stress. If not a brain, then what are we looking at? The answer may lie in distribution. Each cell in a plant is both participant and processor. Information is not collected in one place. It is shared across tissues. A stimulus applied to a single leaf can alter the behavior of others far away, even untouched. Roots under attack can warn leaves to boost defenses. A leaf shaded by its neighbor can trigger growth adjustments in the stem. The whole organism, though rooted in place, acts as a unified network. The overall mood. Plants operate as distributed intelligence systems, integrating countless signals without ever needing a central brain. This is not metaphor. Laboratory studies confirm that plants exchange rapid electrical messages akin to action potentials in neurons. The speed is slower, millimeters per second instead of meters, but the logic is strikingly similar. One experiment showed that when caterpillars chewed on a tomato leaf, electrical signals raced to distant leaves, priming them to release defensive chemicals, even before the herbivore reached them. This is anticipation in action, an internal communication system that coordinates strategy across the entire organism. The parallels to human technology are impossible to ignore. Our most advanced systems, the Internet, smart grids, decentralized AI, thrive not on central control but on distributed processing. Each node acts locally, but the network behaves globally. In plants, the same principle is at work. Every cell, every root tip, every leaf is a node. Together, they process a world of complexity: water gradients, light spectra, soil nutrients, competition, cooperation. The plant, without moving, computes survival. This shift in perspective is revolutionary. For centuries, we believed that cognition required speed, mobility, and a central nervous system. But plants defy all three. They are slow, rooted, and decentralized, and yet they demonstrate traits we reserve for intelligent systems. Perhaps it is not they who are deficient, but us who are narrow in definition. The implications extend far beyond biology. Agricultural engineers are already drawing lessons from plant networks to design resilient farming systems. Imagine crops that signal each other about drought before stress becomes visible, or forests that collectively manage resources under climate change. If we learn to read these signals, electrical, chemical, acoustic, we may unlock strategies for sustainability that no machine could design on its own. And there is another layer: geopolitics. Forests, especially tropical ones like the Amazon, are not just ecological marvels, but also strategic resources. They regulate rainfall patterns across continents, influence agriculture thousands of kilometers away, and store carbon on a planetary scale. If these forests operate as distributed intelligent systems, then damaging them is not simply an environmental tragedy. It is equivalent to dismantling one of Earth's most sophisticated regulatory networks, a network humanity depends on for climate stability, food security, and even political balance between nations. But perhaps the most provocative insight comes when we compare plant decision-making to human societies. In centralized systems, failure at the top can collapse the whole. In distributed systems, resilience emerges from diversity and redundancy. Plants embody this principle. Damage one root and others continue. Lose one branch and growth persists elsewhere. It is a lesson not only for ecology, but for governance, economics, and even cybersecurity. Intelligence that cannot be killed by a single blow, that is intelligence built for survival. And so, as we continue this investigation, we confront a radical possibility that the future of human systems, from AI to agriculture to global governance, may find its best teacher not in animals, not in machines, but in plants. The silent, the still, the underestimated. To understand just how far this quiet intelligence reaches, we must look at experiments that reveal plants not only reacting, but predicting. The distinction is subtle but profound. A reaction is mechanical. Push and something moves. But a prediction requires history, memory, and expectation. The overall mood is an organism, however simple, carries something of the past forward to shape its future. For plants, the evidence is mounting. Take climbing beans. In one set of trials, scientists exposed them to moving light sources that rotated across a surface in predictable cycles. At first, the beans grew toward the light, as expected, following its current position. But then something astonishing occurred. Over time, their stems began to shift direction before the light moved, anticipating where it would be next. This was not reflex, it was forecast. The beans had internalized the pattern, building a primitive model of change and adjusting their growth accordingly. A similar story unfolded with Arabidopsis thaliana. When exposed to daily cold stress at the same hour, the plants started activating cold response genes ahead of time. They did not wait for the stress, they prepared for it. Anticipation is one of the clearest hallmarks of intelligence, and here it was, in a tiny plant with no brain, no neurons, no synapses. The implications are staggering. Prediction demands more than sensitivity. It demands integration of signals across time, recognition of rhythm, and the ability to act on expectation. In humans, we call this learning. In machines, we call it modeling. In plants, we are only beginning to accept that it exists at all. Skeptics argue these are simply biochemical feedback loops. But that explanation is not so different from what governs us. Neurons themselves are chemical machines, firing based on ion flows, receptor activations, and molecular cascades. The difference is speed and scale. Plants process information in hours and days. We process it in milliseconds. But slowness is not absence. A slow clock still keeps time. The deeper question is not whether plants predict, but what that means for the systems they inhabit. Forests, grasslands, and agricultural fields are not just passive landscapes. They are networks of predictive organisms, each adjusting not only to its own past, but also to its neighbors. A tree anticipating drought might signal others through fungal networks, prompting a whole stand to prepare before the crisis hits. This transforms our view of ecosystems from collections of individuals to cooperative intelligences, managing risk collectively across entire landscapes. And here, the geopolitical relevance becomes stark. Nations battling climate change cannot afford to overlook how plant systems stabilize environments. Crop failures triggered by unpredictable weather can devastate economies, spark migration, and destabilize governments. But plants that anticipate patterns through epigenetic memory, chemical communication, or inherited adaptation may hold the key to food resilience. By decoding their strategies, we might breed or engineer crops that forecast stress the way their wild relatives do. For nations dependent on imports, such as much of North Africa or the Middle East, this knowledge could mean the difference between stability and unrest. There is another lesson, too, one that challenges our philosophy. We often define intelligence as fast, centralized, and conscious. But the plant world suggests another model, slow, distributed, unconscious, yet still effective. A model where prediction emerges not from thought but from physiology, not from neurons but from networks of cells tuned to rhythm and change. It forces us to ask whether our criteria for intelligence are too narrow, too human. As we widen the lens, a pattern emerges. Memory in plants is not abstract, not symbolic, but embodied. It lives in chemical pathways, in altered sensitivities, in the very tissues of leaves and roots. Some memories can even span generations. Seeds from parents that endured drought often germinate with pre-adapted traits, a kind of environmental inheritance that prepares them for hardship before they encounter it. This is not evolution by mutation, it is strategy by memory. And so, slowly, carefully, the walls separating cognition from physiology begin to crumble. If intelligence is the ability to use information from the past to guide the future, then plants, long dismissed as passive, must be invited back into the conversation. If memory and prediction redefine what it means for plants to be intelligent, then communication takes that revelation even further. Intelligence is not only about what an organism knows, but also about how it shares information. And here, plants are far more sophisticated than once believed. For centuries, humans assumed plants existed in isolation, each one a silent, self-contained unit. But beneath the soil and across the air, an intricate web of signals pulses constantly. Roots leak chemicals into the ground. Leaves release volatile compounds into the atmosphere. Fungi weave threads between trees, linking entire forests into what some scientists now call the wood wide web. These are not metaphors. They are measurable chemical and electrical exchanges carrying information about resources, threats, and opportunities. Consider drought. When one plant experiences water stress, it can transmit chemical cues through shared fungal networks, prompting its neighbors to close stomata and conserve water before they feel the stress themselves. In some cases, a single tree's signal cascades across dozens of others, creating a collective defensive posture. This is not random diffusion. It is targeted warning, distributed resilience. Above ground, the story continues. When attacked by herbivores, many species release volatile organic compounds, airborne alarm signals. Neighboring plants detect them and preemptively increase their own defenses, producing tannins, alkaloids, or structural changes that deter predators. In some experiments, even unrelated species responded, as though plants were eavesdropping on each other's distress calls. The air, it turns out, is a medium not of silence, but of constant conversation. Some species refine this communication even further, tailoring signals to context. A plant under insect attack may release one chemical blend, but under fungal infection, a completely different profile. Neighbors not only detect danger, but decode its kind. This is discrimination, a form of categorization we usually attribute to higher animals. And then there is kin recognition. In laboratory settings, certain plants treat relatives differently from strangers. Sea rocket plants grown beside siblings compete less aggressively underground, their roots avoiding unnecessary overlap. But when strangers grow nearby, their roots become combative, expanding outward to secure territory. This is social awareness at the molecular level, not thought, but strategy shaped by identity. The parallels to human societies are striking. Nations, too, must decide when to cooperate and when to compete. Sometimes they share resources through alliances. Other times they hoard them in rivalry. The plant kingdom has been balancing this tension for millions of years, fine-tuning when to share carbon with a shaded neighbor and when to starve out a competitor. For policymakers, the metaphor is almost irresistible. Forests as geopolitical models, each species negotiating survival within a web of mutual dependence and competition. These discoveries have sparked debate across the scientific community. Is this true communication, or are we projecting human concepts onto biochemistry? Critics caution against anthropomorphism. Yet the functional outcome is undeniable. Information moves from one organism to another, changes behavior, and enhances survival. By any working definition, that is communication. The overall mood of understanding this communication are enormous. Imagine crops engineered to signal each other when pests arrive, reducing the need for pesticides. Picture agricultural fields where stress signals propagate across hectares, enabling farmers to intervene early with precision. Such bio-inspired agriculture could transform food systems, saving billions in resources and reducing ecological damage. Even more provocatively, forests that operate as shared information networks may play a stabilizing role in the global climate system. By distributing stress responses, they buffer ecosystems against collapse. When deforestation disrupts these networks, it is not only biomass that is lost, but also the intelligence of the system itself, a capacity for resilience we are only beginning to comprehend. In this light, communication is not just a botanical curiosity. It is a form of social intelligence, one that reshapes how we think about ecosystems, agriculture, and the future of human survival. Plants are not mute. They are whispering constantly, to themselves, to each other, even across species lines.
The challenge is not whether they speak, but whether we are willing to listen. Communication between plants is not a curiosity. It is the foundation of something larger, collective intelligence. In the animal world, we see versions of this in flocks of birds, schools of fish, or swarms of insects. Each individual follows local rules, yet together they form patterns that appear purposeful, even strategic. Plants, though immobile, achieve something equally astonishing through chemistry, fungi, and shared resources. In deserts, shrubs time their flowering to rainfall events, synchronizing reproduction to ensure pollinators arrive when needed. This is not one plant acting in isolation. It is an entire population coordinating behavior to maximize success. In forests, the level of coordination is even more complex.
Fungal filaments link trees into networks capable of sharing carbon, nitrogen, and warning signals. A shaded sapling may receive sugars from an older neighbor. A pest-infested tree may transmit alerts that prime others for defense. Researchers call this the wood wide web, but its function is more than metaphorical. It is infrastructure, a living internet woven beneath our feet. What makes this phenomenon remarkable is not just communication, but selectivity. Some trees prioritize kin, channeling more resources to offspring or close relatives. Others allocate to partners in mutualistic relationships, favoring allies that provide reciprocal benefits. This implies a level of discrimination and strategy that resembles economic decision-making. Plants, in effect, negotiate. They decide when to share, when to withhold, and with whom to cooperate. From a geopolitical perspective, this mirrors human dynamics on a startling scale. Nations form alliances, share technology or trade, and sometimes restrict resources to competitors. Forests are practicing their own version of diplomacy. They embody cooperation and rivalry simultaneously, balancing the survival of individuals with the stability of the community. For policymakers, this offers an intriguing analogy: distributed governance that resists collapse, even when some members fail. But collective intelligence in plants does more than stabilize ecosystems. It creates resilience at scale. When one tree suffers, its neighbors may compensate. When drought hits, water-saving signals ripple outward, allowing entire stands to prepare. These networks buffer against shock, much like distributed energy grids stabilize modern cities. In ecological terms, redundancy and diversity are not inefficiencies, they are strengths. The loss of such systems, then, carries catastrophic implications. Deforestation does not only remove trees, it dismantles the communication and resilience woven into their communities. A forest cleared is not just biomass lost, but an intelligent system dismantled. Rainfall patterns shift, soil degrades, local climates destabilize. A natural male narrator voice with a warm, friendly tone. The Amazon, for instance, is often called the lungs of the earth. But in truth, it may be more accurate to call it the neural network of the Earth's climate, a system that processes information, distributes resilience, and stabilizes the biosphere. From an economic angle, the lesson is direct. Nations that destroy forests for short-term gain sacrifice not only ecological stability, but also long-term security. Floods, droughts, crop failures, and migration crises follow. By contrast, nations that preserve and harness forest intelligence may secure agricultural resilience, water security, and even geopolitical leverage in climate negotiations. In a world already destabilized by rising temperatures, this could become a decisive factor in global power. And yet, perhaps the most humbling revelation is this: collective intelligence does not require consciousness. It does not require leaders, hierarchies, or central planning.
It emerges from countless small interactions. Roots trading molecules, leaves releasing signals, fungi ferrying nutrients. Out of local acts arises global order. That principle challenges not only our biology textbooks, but our assumptions about intelligence itself. Plants remind us that wisdom can be slow, silent, and distributed, and that sometimes the most enduring forms of intelligence are not those that shout the loudest, but those that whisper together, in networks vast enough to outlast empires. The more scientists study plant communication, the clearer it becomes. These signals are not crude alarms, but sophisticated languages. Each molecule carries meaning. Each blend conveys context. And plants, far from being passive receivers, actively interpret what they hear. Take volatile organic compounds, the airborne chemicals released when plants are wounded. Early research suggested these were simple distress calls, but closer analysis revealed complexity. Different attackers triggered different blends. A leaf chewed by caterpillars emits one profile, while fungal infection produces another.
Neighbors do not just hear danger, they decode what kind of danger is approaching. Their responses are tailored: more tannins against herbivores, antifungal compounds against pathogens. This is selective defense, information-rich and context-aware. Even more striking, some species customize their messages depending on who is listening. Sagebrush plants, for example, release slightly different chemical blends when surrounded by kin compared to strangers. Relatives respond more strongly, as though they recognize the dialect. This suggests not only communication, but localized languages, dialects shaped by ecology and genetics. It is as if plants fine-tune their voices to maximize efficiency within their own communities. And neighbors are not merely passive. They decide how to respond based on prior experience. A tobacco plant exposed once to sagebrush warnings may react weakly, but after repeated exposure, it responds faster and stronger, as if primed by memory. This phenomenon, called induced resistance, functions like immunological learning. Plants are not simply repeating reflexes, they are updating their responses based on history. Such adaptability blurs the line between biology and cognition. In human terms, meaning exists when a signal represents something in the world and guides action. By that definition, plant communication is meaningful. Molecules stand in for threats, nutrients, or identities. Receptors act as translators, decoding signals into gene expression and behavior. The plant world is not silent. It is full of representations, chemical codes that map external reality into internal adjustment. For human societies, this has more than symbolic relevance. If crops can be engineered to send and interpret such signals more effectively, we could create fields that operate as cooperative networks rather than isolated individuals. Imagine rice paddies where plants signal early pest threats across hectares, or maize fields that synchronize defenses without pesticides. The overall mood should be relaxed, engaging, comfortable, and light science podcast. Keep your voice clear and coherent with a gentle intonation that is both intelligent and soothing. Use pauses when necessary. The overall mood should be relaxed, engaging, and comfortable, perfect for bedtime reading and space narration. The tempo should be around 0.90. This would reduce chemical dependence, save billions, and soften agriculture's ecological footprint. Nations investing in such bio-inspired innovation could gain decisive advantages in food security and sustainable development. But there is another implication, one that touches philosophy. If plants interpret signals differently depending on context and history, then communication in nature is not absolute. It is relational. A message has no universal meaning. Its interpretation depends on the receiver's state, memory, and ecology. This challenges the notion of rigid biological programming. Instead, it paints a picture of living systems engaged in a constant negotiation of meaning. Critics warn against anthropomorphism, but the evidence is undeniable. These signals alter behavior selectively, persist across time, and adapt to context. Whether or not we call it language, the parallels to our own systems of communication are striking. And here lies a profound irony. For centuries, humans dismissed plants as mute. Yet they have been conversing beneath our feet and across our fields all along, crafting dialects in chemistry, building social codes in molecules. The real question is not whether plants speak. It is whether we are finally ready to listen. When we think of computation, we picture machines, silicon chips, binary code, algorithms running at blinding speed. But computation at its core is simpler. It is the transformation of input into output according to rules. And by that definition, plants compute. They compute constantly, using chemistry as their circuitry and physiology as their hardware. Signals from the environment, light, water, gravity, touch, chemical gradients, flow into the plant. These signals are integrated through hormones, ion fluxes, and gene expression. The result is not automatic, but conditional. If sunlight is strong and soil nutrients are high, then invest in leaves. The overall mood of computation is relaxed and easy to follow, like a light science podcast. The overall mood should be relaxed, engaging, and comfortable, perfect for bedtime reading and space narration. The tempo should be around 0.90. If water is scarce and herbivores are near, then prioritize root depth and chemical defenses. These are if-then statements, the very logic gates of living computation. In fact, many plant responses resemble biological algorithms. A Venus flytrap, for example, will not close unless 2 trigger hairs are touched within about 20 seconds. This ensures energy is not wasted on raindrops or debris. Functionally, this is the equivalent of an AND gate in computing. If touch A and touch B occur within X seconds, then fire. Bladderworts, aquatic carnivorous plants, use similar logic with their traps, requiring precise conditions before expending energy on capture. These mechanisms are not random reflexes. They are rules, finely tuned to balance cost and reward. Modern science has begun to map these processes as non-neural computation. Calcium waves transmit information across tissues. Hormone gradients act as weighting systems, amplifying some signals and dampening others. Electrical impulses carry urgency from leaf to root. Together, they form circuits not unlike those in a digital machine, except their medium is molecular rather than electronic. The consequences are staggering. If plants are computing in distributed biochemical networks, then intelligence cannot be defined only by neurons. It becomes a property of systems that process information adaptively, whether through synapses, molecules, or something else entirely. Cognition, in this light, is not a thing brains have, but a process life performs. This reframing carries practical weight. Engineers studying plant computation are beginning to design bio-inspired systems that mimic these strategies. In robotics, for example, some teams have built machines that grow like vines rather than move like animals, extending flexible tendrils guided by local sensing instead of centralized commands. In optimization problems, researchers have used root growth algorithms to solve mazes and network design challenges, demonstrating that slow, distributed exploration can outperform brute force calculation. The economic implications are no less dramatic.
Nations investing in plant-inspired computation may pioneer a new class of technology: resilient, decentralized, fault-tolerant systems. Just as a plant can lose a branch and continue, these technologies could withstand partial failure without collapse, invaluable in sectors like cybersecurity, infrastructure, and defense. In an age when centralized systems are vulnerable to attack, plant intelligence offers a blueprint for resilience. And at the philosophical level, the lessons run deeper still. Plants remind us that logic is not confined to machines or minds. It can emerge from cells, tissues, and networks that have no awareness in the human sense. Intelligence does not need speed. It does not need neurons. It needs only the ability to process the past, weigh the present, and guide the future. In that sense, every leaf and root tip becomes a quiet processor, computing survival in real time. Memory is often seen as the signature of intelligence. We measure it in neurons, in the firing of synapses, in the storage of experiences within the brain. But plants, without neurons or synapses, hold memories too, not in a central archive, but in their very bodies. This is embodied memory, encoded in physiology, chemistry, and even inherited patterns passed to future generations. Experiments reveal the depth of this hidden memory. When plants endure repeated drought, they adjust the way their stomata, the tiny pores on leaves, open and close. Even when water returns, the altered behavior persists, as though the plant remembers the risk and hedges against it. This is not fatigue. It is a recalibrated sensitivity, a memory inscribed in the plant's tissues. More astonishing still, such adjustments can leap across generations. Seeds from stressed parents often germinate with traits pre-adapted to hardship. They may sprout deeper roots, flower earlier, or conserve water more aggressively than seeds from unstressed parents. This is not genetic mutation. It is epigenetic inheritance. Changes in how genes are expressed, carried by chemical marks on DNA or regulatory RNAs. In effect, the experience of one generation is passed as foresight to the next. This phenomenon challenges long-standing models of evolution. Traditionally, adaptation was thought to occur only through genetic mutation, filtered by natural selection. But in plants, experience itself can become heritable strategy. Drought, salinity, pests all leave imprints that shape descendants, giving them a head start in the same hostile conditions. This is not instinct hard-coded at birth, nor learning acquired later. It is something in between, inherited memory. The implications are profound. In agriculture, harnessing this memory could revolutionize crop resilience. By conditioning parent plants under stress, scientists might produce offspring already primed for drought or heat. In a world of rising temperatures and erratic rainfall, such pre-adapted seeds could become a lifeline for vulnerable regions. Nations that master this technique may secure food stability while others face crisis, shifting balances of power in the geopolitics of grain. But this discovery also carries philosophical weight. If plants can pass experiences to their descendants, then memory is not confined to minds. It is a property of life itself, a bridge between past and future that does not require awareness. It suggests that survival is not just about genes, but about histories carried forward in subtle molecular echoes. Some researchers call this somatic memory, the idea that the body itself carries the record of experience. The overall mood of animals, plant memory is distributed, written in stomata, hormone levels, chromatin states. Every tissue bears the imprint of what came before. And when those imprints persist across generations, they blur the line between adaptation and learning. For human societies, this perspective is humbling. We tend to define intelligence as the ability to reflect, to remember consciously, to tell stories of the past. But plants demonstrate another form, unconscious, chemical, yet powerful enough to reshape ecosystems. Their memory is not told in words, but in altered physiology, not stored in libraries, but in seeds. And from those seeds grows foresight, not mystical, but biological, a strategy etched into the next generation before it even takes root. If the leaves are the solar panels of a plant, then the roots are its hidden command centers. Buried beneath the soil, they form a sprawling network that is both sensory and computational. Roots do not simply anchor a plant. They explore, detect, evaluate, and decide. In many ways, the underground world is where much of plant intelligence resides. Root tips are especially critical. Each tip is sheathed in a sensitive cap, packed with cells that detect gravity, moisture, nutrients, and even toxins. As they probe the soil, these tips behave less like passive drills and more like scouts on reconnaissance missions. They send back chemical and electrical information, guiding the entire root system to branch, redirect, or halt depending on conditions. But the most striking revelation is that root tips seem to act in coordination, communicating with each other across the network. If one root encounters a pocket of high nitrogen, others adjust growth to exploit the discovery. If one root detects salt, others avoid the contaminated zone. This is distributed problem solving, a decentralized intelligence comparable to swarm robotics or parallel computing. Charles Darwin, more than a century ago, speculated that the root tip might act like a brain, coordinating responses for the rest of the plant. At the time, the idea was dismissed. But modern studies have revived his intuition. Electrical impulses have been measured traveling between root tips, and calcium waves ripple through underground tissues much like neural activity. While slower and less centralized, the parallels are undeniable. Roots process information, integrate it, and orchestrate action. This intelligence becomes especially apparent when roots face conflict. If two plants grow side by side, their roots often sense each other and alter strategy. Sometimes they compete, expanding aggressively into shared soil. Sometimes they avoid direct overlap, minimizing wasteful battles. And sometimes, especially between kin, they even share resources, intertwining in cooperation rather than rivalry. These are not blind reactions. They are conditional strategies shaped by context. The economic potential of decoding root intelligence is immense. Agriculture has long focused on what happens above ground: leaves, stems, fruits. But the hidden half of plants may hold the key to food security in the 21st century. By breeding or engineering crops with roots that compute more efficiently, nations could unlock drought resistance, nutrient efficiency, and higher yields with fewer fertilizers. In regions where soil degradation threatens millions, root intelligence could mean the difference between survival and collapse. Geopolitically, the stakes are no less dramatic. Control over staple crops has always been a lever of power, from the Irish potato famine to the 20th century Green Revolution. In the decades ahead, as climate extremes intensify, nations with access to resilient root systems may wield new forms of influence. Grain, after all, is not just food. It is stability, trade, and sometimes weapon. The intelligence of roots may shape the balance of global politics as surely as the intelligence of leaders. And yet, perhaps the most humbling realization is this: under every step we take, beneath every city and desert, lies a vast cognitive layer we barely understand.
Roots have been solving problems of scarcity, competition, and cooperation for hundreds of millions of years. They are networks that predate our technologies, strategies that outlast our empires. If there is wisdom in nature, much of it lies hidden in the soil. When we imagine senses, we think of eyes, ears, noses, tongues, and skin. But plants lacking these organs were long assumed to be insensible. Yet modern research reveals the opposite. They are multisensory organisms, capable of perceiving the world in ways that rival and sometimes exceed animals. Their intelligence begins not in thought, but in perception. Light is perhaps the most obvious. Plants do not just sense brightness. They discriminate among wavelengths, detecting the difference between red and far red light to judge whether they are shaded by competitors. Blue light receptors orient leaves for maximum efficiency, while UV receptors activate protective compounds against damage. This is not simple sensitivity. It is analysis of spectra, information-rich and fine-grained. Gravity is another cue, perceived by specialized starch-filled organelles that settle in cells of the root cap. This tells the plant which way is down, guiding roots deeper into soil and stems upward into light. But gravity does not act alone. Plants integrate it with moisture gradients, redirecting roots not strictly downward, but toward the wettest path. This is contextual decision-making, blending multiple senses into a single course of action. They sense touch as well. Tendrils of climbing vines coil only after repeated stimulation, a form of tactile processing akin to verifying a signal before acting. The Venus flytrap requires 2 touches within seconds to snap, a sensory filter designed to avoid false triggers. Such selectivity demonstrates not just detection, but validation. Plants are, in effect, checking their inputs before committing to costly responses. Sound, too, enters the story. Studies suggest that roots grow preferentially toward low-frequency vibrations associated with water. Others indicate plants may respond to the chewing sounds of herbivores by priming defenses even before physical damage occurs. Though still controversial, the evidence hints at acoustic sensitivity, a hidden channel of awareness vibrating through the soil and air. And then there is chemical detection, arguably their richest sense. Plants taste the soil for nitrates, phosphates, and salts, directing roots with exquisite precision. They smell each other through volatile compounds, distinguishing kin, neighbors, and threats. They even sense atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, adjusting stomatal openings in response. To call this chemistry alone misses the point. It is perception translated into adaptive strategy. Together, these abilities form a multimodal sensory network. A plant may combine red light signals with soil nitrogen levels to decide whether to grow taller or invest in roots. It may weigh drought cues against pest cues to prioritize which defense to deploy. This integration is not random. It is structured, conditional, and responsive to trade-offs. It is, by all practical measures, perception-driven intelligence. For human societies, this carries profound lessons. Our own technologies increasingly rely on sensor fusion, integrating vision, sound, touch, and data streams to guide autonomous systems. Plants have been perfecting such fusion for millions of years. Their ability to process noisy, overlapping signals without centralized brains suggests pathways for engineering robust, low-energy decision-making systems.
Geopolitically, nations that harness these insights could lead in developing climate-smart agriculture and resilient technologies. Imagine crops that listen for approaching pests or smell drought before it arrives, adjusting in real time without human intervention. The benefits would ripple across food systems, trade networks, and political stability. In this sense, plant senses are not just curiosities. They are blueprints for survival in a century of crisis. In the stillness of forests and fields, another dimension of plant intelligence emerges: the balancing act between cooperation and competition. Unlike animals, plants cannot run from rivals or predators. Their strategies for survival unfold where they stand, in constant negotiation with neighbors. And within this negotiation lies a quiet form of social intelligence. Competition is obvious. Trees in dense forests stretch upward, racing for light. Their crowns form canopies so thick that little sun reaches the ground. Roots beneath the soil duel silently, expanding outward to capture water and nutrients. This is survival by exclusion, each plant striving to outpace the others. In economic terms, it is a marketplace where scarcity drives escalation. But cooperation, though less visible, may be even more important. Through fungal networks, some trees share carbon with shaded saplings. Leguminous plants enrich the soil with nitrogen, benefiting entire ecosystems, not just themselves. Flowering plants attract pollinators, creating mutualistic contracts that sustain both parties. These partnerships blur the line between individual and community, weaving survival into shared destiny. What makes this interplay remarkable is its context dependence. A plant may compete with neighbors for light while simultaneously cooperating underground by exchanging nutrients. It may release chemicals to suppress rival seedlings, yet provide nectar for pollinators that benefit the whole habitat. In short, plants practice selective cooperation, deciding when to ally and when to fight. The overall mood of our own species, nations compete for resources, markets, and influence. Yet they also collaborate in trade, climate accords, and technology exchanges. Too much competition leads to collapse. Too much cooperation risks exploitation. Plants, in their silent wisdom, show us how to balance both, to compete where survival demands and to cooperate where stability benefits the whole. Experiments confirm the subtlety of these strategies. In kin recognition studies, sea rocket plants reduce root aggression when surrounded by relatives, conserving energy for collective growth. But when strangers appear, they shift to competition. Sunflowers adjust leaf angles to minimize shading of kin, while non-kin receive no such courtesy. This is identity-based behavior, a social logic encoded in physiology. For agriculture, decoding these dynamics could reshape how we design cropping systems. By planting varieties that naturally cooperate, sharing resources instead of competing destructively, farmers could increase yields without additional fertilizer or water. Intercropping systems, already practiced in traditional farming, gain new scientific backing as expressions of plants' social intelligence. On a planetary scale, the stakes are vast. Forests that balance cooperation and competition stabilize climate, regulate rainfall, and anchor biodiversity. But when logging, monocultures, or invasive species disrupt these balances, ecosystems lose resilience. Collapse follows, often with cascading effects on human economies and societies. Here lies the larger lesson. Intelligence need not be loud or conscious to be effective. Plants remind us that strategy can be quiet, distributed, and subtle. They survive not by domination alone, but by weaving webs of rivalry and alliance that endure through time. Perhaps, in their stillness, they offer a model for our own fractured world, a model where competition and cooperation are not opposites, but partners in survival. In the animal kingdom, defense often means speed, teeth, or claws. But plants, unable to flee or fight in the conventional sense, have evolved a different kind of arsenal, one built on chemistry, deception, and strategy.
Far from passive, they are masters of defense, deploying tactics so intricate that they rival the intelligence of predators themselves. One of the most striking examples is induced defense. When attacked by caterpillars, maize plants release volatile chemicals that do not repel the caterpillars directly, but instead attract parasitic wasps, natural enemies of the herbivores. It is, in effect, outsourcing defense, calling in reinforcements from the sky. The maize does not strike back alone. It recruits allies. Other plants take the fight to the molecular level. Mustards and cabbages, for example, produce glucosinolates, compounds that deter insects and mammals alike. Milkweeds produce sticky latex that gums up the mouths of herbivores. Some even tailor their defenses dynamically. Tomatoes increase toxin production only in attacked tissues, conserving energy elsewhere. This is cost-benefit analysis, a calculation of where defense is worth the price. Deception also plays a role. Passion flowers evolve leaf shapes and patterns that mimic butterfly eggs, discouraging females from laying their own eggs on a plant already occupied. Orchids emit chemical perfumes that mimic the sex pheromones of female insects, luring males into pollinating them. These are not brute force strategies. They are psychological manipulations, exploiting the behavior of others to survive. The sophistication goes further still. Some acacia trees form alliances with ants, providing them with nectar and shelter in exchange for protection. The ants patrol branches, attacking any herbivore that dares to feed. In this living contract, plant and insect function almost like employer and security force. Each benefits, but the arrangement requires fine-tuned reciprocity. Too little nectar, and the ants abandon the tree. Too much, and the ants overexploit. A natural male narrator with a warm, friendly tone. The overall mood should be relaxed, engaging, and comfortable, perfect for bedtime reading and space narration. The tempo should be around 0-90. Balance is everything. These strategies carry lessons for human systems. Defense, whether ecological or geopolitical, is rarely about brute strength alone. It is about alliances, deception, and efficient allocation of resources. Plants demonstrate that survival favors those who combine resilience with cunning, those who use enemies against each other, and those who build networks of protection. The economic implications are equally significant. If crops can be bred or engineered to harness these defensive strategies, attracting natural predators, tailoring toxin production, or signaling for help, pesticide use could decline dramatically. This would reduce costs, environmental damage, and health risks while strengthening food security. For nations heavily reliant on chemical agriculture, plant-inspired defense could reshape both economies and global trade. Yet perhaps the most profound lesson is philosophical. We often imagine intelligence as proactive, aggressive, seeking dominance. But in plants, intelligence often appears as patience and precision, striking not with speed but with strategy, conserving energy until the exact moment action is required. Their survival is not accidental. It is calculated, refined across millions of years into a playbook of quiet warfare. And so, in every forest, meadow, and field, battles unfold invisibly. Leaves are not just green surfaces, but fortresses. Roots are not just anchors, but spies. Flowers are not only ornaments, but weapons of manipulation. Intelligence here does not roar. It whispers through chemicals, alliances, and the silent turning of strategy into survival. If survival depends on sensing the world, it also depends on knowing when to act. For plants, timing is everything. Without the ability to move, they must synchronize growth, reproduction, and defense with rhythms of the earth. And so, hidden within every leaf and root lies a system as precise as any clock, the circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythms in plants are not mere responses to light and dark. They are internal timekeepers, able to run even in constant conditions. In experiments where plants were kept in unchanging darkness, their leaves still raised and lowered in daily cycles, as if following a silent metronome. This clock tells them when to open stomata for photosynthesis, when to produce defensive compounds, and when to flower. The sophistication of this system is remarkable. Plants integrate cues from light, temperature, and even nutrient cycles into a temporal framework. This allows them to anticipate sunrise, adjust to seasonal shifts, and align with pollinators. A flower that opens too early risks missing its pollinators. Too late, and reproduction fails. Timing is survival. Some species take timing to extraordinary levels. Desert annuals germinate only after rare rains, cued not by water alone, but by the pattern of rainfall across days. They calculate whether conditions are likely to sustain growth, effectively betting on the future. Others, like certain trees in the tropics, synchronize mass flowering events so precisely that entire forests erupt at once, overwhelming predators and ensuring successful pollination. Such coordination requires not just clocks, but communication across populations. This temporal intelligence extends to memory. A plant exposed to recurring stress at the same hour each day can learn the schedule, activating defenses in advance. In essence, it predicts the future by remembering the past. This ability mirrors human scheduling, the transformation of history into expectation. For agriculture, understanding plant chronobiology is critical. Crops yield differently depending on the alignment of their internal clocks with local day-night cycles. Scientists now breed for chronotypes, tailoring crop clocks to regional conditions. In a warming world, aligning these rhythms with shifting seasons may prove decisive for food security. A natural male narrator voice with a warm, friendly tone, fluid and easy to follow, like a light science podcast. The overall mood should be relaxed, engaging, and comfortable, perfect for bedtime reading and space narration. The tempo should be around 0.90. Imagine wheat that flowers at just the right moment despite erratic springs, or rice that synchronizes with monsoon patterns disrupted by climate change. The geopolitical consequences are tangible. Nations that master agricultural chronobiology can stabilize yields while others face volatility. In global grain markets, timing translates directly to power. Who harvests first, who avoids losses, who controls supply chains. In this sense, the intelligence of plant clocks ripples outward into economics and diplomacy. But there is also a deeper philosophical insight. We often define intelligence as problem-solving in space. Yet plants remind us that intelligence also unfolds in time. To know when to grow, when to fight, when to rest, these are not trivial decisions. They are life or death calculations written into physiology. For plants, wisdom is not speed, but rhythm, not reaction, but anticipation. And so, as we watch leaves unfurl at dawn or flowers open to meet their pollinators, we are witnessing something profound. Organisms keeping time with the planet, aligning their fates to the turning of the earth. Their stillness hides not ignorance, but mastery of temporal strategy. For most of human history, plants have been treated as resources: food, timber, fiber, medicine. We plow them into fields, cut them into lumber, and boil them into remedies. But what if they are not merely passive commodities? What if they are partners in a relationship older than civilization itself, guiding our survival as much as we shape theirs? Agriculture is the clearest example.
10,000 years ago, humans began domesticating wild grasses into wheat, barley, and rice. But domestication is not one-sided. Plants, too, shaped us. The shift from foraging to farming transformed human societies, anchoring settlements, creating surpluses, and enabling cities.
Civilizations rose on the backs of cereals and legumes, not because we chose them alone, but because these plants cooperated, yielding seeds large enough to harvest, cycles stable enough to predict, and chemistry nutritious enough to sustain. Even now, plants guide the fates of nations. A drought in one grain belt can send shockwaves through global markets. The maize of North America, the rice of Asia, the wheat of Eurasia. These crops are more than food. They are geopolitical levers, shaping alliances and conflicts. When grain exports falter, unrest follows. When harvests flourish, stability holds. The intelligence embedded in plant resilience is thus inseparable from the stability of human societies. Beyond food, plants have been humanity's oldest pharmacists. Aspirin traces back to willow bark. Quinine, once the world's only defense against malaria, comes from the cinchona tree. Even in the age of synthetic drugs, many of our most advanced treatments derive from plant compounds. Complex chemistries evolved over millions of years as defenses against pests and pathogens. Plants, in their silent warfare, created a molecular library we continue to borrow from. This library is far from exhausted. Tropical forests, home to the greatest plant diversity, may hold cures for diseases we have yet to encounter. But every hectare lost to logging or fire erases potential knowledge. It is not only biodiversity at stake, but also the collapse of an ancient biochemical intelligence that could secure our future health. The economic stakes are immense. Nations that protect biodiversity may hold strategic advantages in pharmaceuticals, agriculture, and biotechnology. Already, competition over genetic resources has sparked debates about biopiracy and intellectual property. Who owns the knowledge encoded in a seed, the molecular wisdom of a rainforest? The answers carry legal, ethical, and geopolitical consequences. The plant-human relationship is not only practical, it is cultural, even spiritual. Across civilizations, plants have been symbols of wisdom, resilience, and renewal. The lotus in Asia, the oak in Europe, maize among the Maya. Each carries not just utility, but meaning. Perhaps this symbolism reflects something deeper, an unconscious recognition of plants not as objects, but as teachers. They embody patience, endurance, and interdependence, values human societies often struggle to sustain. And so, the question becomes not whether plants are intelligent, but whether we are intelligent enough to recognize the partnership. They feed us, heal us, clothe us, and regulate the very atmosphere we breathe. Yet we treat them as expendable, burning forests for profit, eroding soils for short-term yield. To ignore their role is not only arrogance, it is self-destruction. Forests are often described as the lungs of the earth, but this metaphor does not capture their true power. They are not simply oxygen factories. They are climate regulators, hydrological engines, and geopolitical assets. To see them only as timber or farmland is to misunderstand the intelligence embedded in their very structure. The Amazon offers the clearest example. Stretching across 9 nations, it pumps billions of tons of water vapor into the atmosphere every year, generating rainfall patterns that reach far beyond South America. Farmers in distant regions, from Argentina's Pampas to the American Midwest, depend on these rain corridors. When deforestation disrupts the system, the consequences ripple globally, reducing crop yields and destabilizing economies.
But the Amazon is more than climate machinery. It is a vast information network, with trees signaling stress, fungi redistributing nutrients, and plant communities adjusting collectively to drought and fire. Destroying the forest dismantles this network, erasing resiliency built over millions of years. What remains is not simply loss of biodiversity, but collapse of an intelligent system that stabilizes the planet itself. The geopolitical stakes are enormous. Forest-rich nations like Brazil, Indonesia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo hold leverage in climate negotiations. Their decisions to protect or exploit directly shape global carbon levels, rainfall, and temperatures. In essence, forests have become strategic bargaining chips, their preservation traded for financial aid, technology transfer, or political concessions. Yet, forests are also vulnerable to exploitation by external powers. Logging companies, mining interests, and industrial agriculture view them as commodities, stripping them without regard for systemic intelligence. This creates a paradox. The very regions richest in ecological intelligence are often poorest in economic power, trapped between global demand and local survival. For developed nations, the lesson is unavoidable. Climate stability cannot be secured without forests. Carbon markets, reforestation projects, and international treaties are attempts to translate ecological intelligence into economic value. But unless these efforts respect the distributed strategies of forests, their need for diversity, connectivity, and resilience, they risk becoming superficial gestures. Philosophically, forests force us to rethink governance. They are models of distributed decision-making. No single tree controls the system, yet collectively they regulate climate, water, and carbon. Their resilience lies in decentralization, redundancy, and cooperation, qualities human societies often fail to cultivate. In them, we see a blueprint for global survival, one that values networks over empires, balance over exploitation. And so, the intelligence of forests is not just a scientific curiosity. It is a strategic reality. Nations that safeguard them safeguard the future. Those that destroy them may gain short-term profit, but invite long-term collapse, ecological, economic, and political. Humanity's fate is thus entwined with these silent networks of green. They are not longs. They are guardians, strategists, and stabilizers, far older and wiser than we dare to admit. Climate change is often described in human terms: rising seas swallowing cities, droughts crippling farms, storms battering coasts. But for plants, the crisis is existential on a deeper scale. They cannot migrate quickly, cannot seek shelter, cannot relocate when their environments turn hostile. Their only option is to adapt, and to adapt fast. In this struggle, the true measure of their intelligence comes into focus. Already, signs of this adaptation are visible. Alpine plants are shifting upward, tracking cooler temperatures along mountain slopes. In some regions, flowering times advance by weeks, synchronizing with earlier springs. In others, plants delay germination, betting against false signals in climates where sudden frosts still follow warm spells. These are not random adjustments. They are strategic recalibrations of timing and physiology, honed by sensory integration and inherited memory. Yet the pace of change is unprecedented. In past epochs, plants adapted over centuries or millennia. Today, climate zones shift within decades. The question is not whether plants can adapt, but whether they can do so quickly enough. For humanity, the answer carries immense weight. Our food, our forests, our very atmosphere depend on how effectively plants recalibrate to new realities. Agriculture is already on the front line. Wheat belts in North America, rice paddies in Asia, and maize fields in Africa face simultaneous stresses: heat, drought, pests expanding into new ranges. The intelligence of crops, their ability to sense, remember, and anticipate, becomes critical. Breeding programs now aim to accelerate what nature does slowly, embedding resilience by drawing on wild relatives that carry deeper adaptive memories. The stakes are geopolitical.
Nations that secure climate-resilient crops will stabilize their food supplies. Those that fail may face famine, migration crises, and political unrest. In 2022, a single disruption in grain exports sent shockwaves through global markets, illustrating how fragile supply chains can be. In a warming world, such shocks will multiply. Plant intelligence, once dismissed as mere curiosity, may become the linchpin of global stability. But there is another layer: the intelligence of ecosystems. Forests, wetlands, and grasslands act as buffers, absorbing carbon, moderating heat, and regulating water. When these systems collapse, feedback loops accelerate warming. Yet when they endure, their distributed intelligence, resource sharing, synchronized flowering, collective defense, provides resilience not just for themselves, but for the planet. Protecting this intelligence is no longer optional. It is survival strategy at a planetary scale. Philosophically, climate change forces us to confront our arrogance. We often view plants as background scenery, static and powerless. Yet in their ability to anticipate, adapt, and endure, they embody strategies humanity desperately needs. Where we respond to crisis with short-term fixes, they have mastered patience and distributed resilience. The tragedy is that our actions now test even their ancient wisdom. And so, the story of climate change is not only about melting glaciers and rising seas. It is about whether the intelligence of plants, honed across millions of years, can withstand the speed of human-driven disruption. If they succeed, we survive with them. If they fail, we fall together. For centuries, the intelligence of plants was invisible, too slow for the human eye, too subtle for crude instruments. But today, with advanced technologies, the hidden strategies of the green world are finally coming into view. What once seemed mystical is now measurable. And in these discoveries, a new frontier emerges: the fusion of biology and technology, where human innovation learns directly from plant intelligence. Time-lapse photography was among the first revelations. By compressing days into minutes, it exposed plants as dynamic actors: roots weaving through soil, stems bending toward light, vines seeking supports. What looked like stillness became purposeful motion. But cameras were only the beginning. Molecular biology opened the next chapter. With genetic sequencing, scientists now map the chemical pathways plants use to sense and respond. We can see which genes switch on when drought strikes, which proteins mediate communication, which epigenetic marks carry memory across generations. The more we look, the clearer it becomes. Plants operate with rules as complex as neural systems, only written in different language. Even more astonishing are tools that let us listen to plants directly. Sensitive electrodes capture electrical signals racing through stems and roots, revealing patterns that resemble primitive nerve impulses. Acoustic sensors detect tiny sounds emitted as water moves through xylem vessels, signals of stress that could one day allow farmers to hear drought before it devastates crops. Some researchers even design AI systems to decode volatile chemical blends, treating plant communication as a language waiting to be translated. This convergence of plant science and technology is not academic alone. It has practical consequences of enormous scale.
Imagine precision agriculture guided not only by satellite images, but also by real-time plant signals. Fields where crops themselves broadcast their needs, reducing waste and maximizing yield. Imagine climate monitoring that uses forests as biological sensors, warning of stress long before satellites detect decline. The geopolitical ramifications are equally striking. Nations investing in plant tech integration may gain unprecedented control over food security and environmental management.
Just as the digital revolution reshaped economies, the biosensing revolution could redraw the map of power in the 21st century. Whoever learns to listen to plants most effectively may dominate agriculture, pharmaceuticals, and climate policy. Philosophically, this technological turn forces us to reconsider agency. If machines can interpret plant signals, does that mean plants are finally speaking in a language we can understand? Or does it mean we are building the translators they never needed? Either way, the divide between human intelligence and plant intelligence grows narrower. We are not inventing their wisdom, we are finally recognizing it. And yet, there is caution here. Technology gives us power, but it also tempts us toward exploitation. To treat plant intelligence as just another resource, something to be mined, patented, and controlled, risks repeating the mistakes of the past. If we reduce forests to data banks or crops to signal processors, we miss the deeper truth. Their intelligence is not just useful, it is essential, a model of resilience that sustains life on Earth. In the end, technology may not simply teach us about plants. Plants may teach us how to build technology, systems that are adaptive, distributed, and sustainable. The question is whether we will learn their lessons or merely extract their secrets. For most of history, ethics has been framed around humans, and more recently, animals. We ask whether creatures can feel pain, whether they have consciousness, whether they deserve rights. Plants, by contrast, have remained outside this circle of concern. Rooted, silent, and slow, they were assumed to lack the qualities that demand moral consideration. But what happens if we admit they possessed intelligence? Not human, not animal, but real and measurable. This question unsettles long-held assumptions. If plants can sense, remember, communicate, and even anticipate, then the line between passive object and living subject begins to blur. They may not suffer as animals do, but they experience in their own way, recording, responding, adapting. To ignore this is to cling to a definition of intelligence designed only to preserve our dominance. Some philosophers argue that acknowledging plant intelligence forces us toward a new ethics of ecology. It does not mean granting trees voting rights or putting carrots on trial. It means recognizing plants as participants in the web of life, not mere background. If they are strategic actors shaping ecosystems, then destroying them is not just resource extraction, it is dismantling intelligence woven into the biosphere. This shift carries profound consequences for policy. Agriculture, logging, and biotechnology are not simply economic activities, they are engagements with living intelligences. Deforestation erases not only carbon sinks, but also collective memory systems that stabilize climate. Monocultures silence the diverse languages of ecosystems, replacing resilient conversations with uniform vulnerability. To treat plants ethically, then, is to safeguard the intelligence that sustains all life, including our own. The geopolitical dimension cannot be ignored. As climate negotiations unfold, forests are already treated as bargaining chips, carbon credits to be traded, offsets to be calculated. But if we recognize them as intelligent systems, the stakes rise. Their destruction becomes not only environmental negligence, but ethical failure, akin to silencing voices in a planetary council. Protecting them becomes not charity, but justice. At the cultural level, this idea is not entirely new. Indigenous traditions across the world have long treated plants as teachers, kin, or spirits. Shamans listen to the voices of trees, farmers honor cycles with ritual, and mythologies describe forests as conscious entities.
What science is now confirming in data, many cultures intuited for millennia. Plants are not objects, they are partners. This does not mean abandoning agriculture or halting all use of plants. It means reframing the relationship. Just as ethical animal farming seeks to balance necessity with compassion, ethical plant engagement might mean farming systems that respect ecosystems, preserving diversity, and avoiding waste. It means treating destruction not as inevitability, but as responsibility. Perhaps the greatest philosophical lesson is humility. Human intelligence has built cities, technologies, and empires, but also wars, crises, and ecological collapse. Plant intelligence, by contrast, has sustained life on Earth for hundreds of millions of years without conquest or domination. To recognize their wisdom is to admit that our way of thinking is not the only way, and perhaps not even the best way for long-term survival. The recognition of plant intelligence does more than rewrite biology. It reshapes our vision of the future. For too long, humanity has treated the green world as background, a stage on which our dramas unfold. But if plants are intelligent systems, then they are not scenery. They are co-authors of survival, partners in shaping the path ahead. Already, glimpses of this partnership are emerging. In architecture, designers are experimenting with living buildings, where vines regulate temperature and moss walls filter air. In energy, algae are cultivated not only for biofuels, but as dynamic systems that adjust growth to maximize efficiency. In robotics, plant-inspired machines grow tendrils instead of rolling wheels, exploring environments too dangerous for humans. Each of these innovations borrows from the strategies of plants: distributed sensing, adaptive growth, patient resilience. Agriculture may be the greatest frontier. Imagine fields where crops communicate stress directly to farmers' sensors, reducing guesswork and chemical use. A natural male narrator with a warm, friendly tone. Imagine seeds pre-programmed through epigenetic memory to anticipate droughts or floods. Imagine polycultures modeled after forests, where diversity creates resilience and plant cooperation stabilizes yields. This is not fantasy. Pilot projects already show that listening to plant signals can cut water use, boost yield, and reduce ecological harm. On a global scale, collaboration with plant intelligence could redefine geopolitics. Forests, wetlands, and grasslands would not be seen as commodities to exploit, but as strategic partners in climate stability. Nations might negotiate not just carbon credits, but agreements to preserve the intelligence of ecosystems, treating them as allies in the struggle against collapse. Those who invest in safeguarding plant intelligence may secure food, water, and climate stability, while those who ignore it risk instability and decline. Philosophically, the lesson is even deeper. We are not the only intelligent species on Earth. Ours is not the only strategy for survival. Where we race, plants wait. Where we centralize, they distribute. Where we consume, they recycle. Their intelligence is not louder than ours, but it is older, steadier, and perhaps wiser. To learn from them is not to diminish humanity, but to expand it, to join a broader conversation of life. Yet the danger is clear. If we continue to burn forests, poison soils, and erode biodiversity, we may silence this intelligence before we ever fully hear it. The question then is urgent. Will we treat plants as disposable tools, or will we recognize them as partners in the future? Because the truth is this: without them, we do not survive. They can exist without us. They did for millions of years. But without their intelligence, their ability to stabilize climate, feed ecosystems, and regulate the planet, humanity's story ends.
The challenge of the 21st century is not just technological, political, or economic. It is relational. Can we learn to live with the intelligence of plants, not against it? The answer will shape not only our survival, but the future of life on Earth. Every ecosystem on Earth carries the fingerprints of plants. They are not merely participants, but architects of life, shaping the conditions in which all other organisms, animals, fungi, even humans, must evolve. To grasp their intelligence is to recognize that our own story is inseparable from theirs. Consider the atmosphere itself. Billions of years ago, cyanobacteria and later algae released oxygen through photosynthesis, transforming a toxic planet into one capable of supporting complex life. Without that green revolution, there would be no animals, no humans, no civilizations. Plants literally rewrote the chemistry of the Earth, turning barren rock into a living biosphere. They continue this architectural role today. Forests regulate rainfall, anchoring hydrological cycles that sustain agriculture far beyond their borders. Grasslands build soil, layer upon layer, creating the fertile black earths that feed nations. Wetlands filter toxins, buffering floods and stabilizing coasts. Every ecosystem we depend upon has been engineered, maintained, or enabled by plant intelligence operating at scale. This influence extends to evolution itself. Pollinators, bees, bats, birds, evolved in tandem with flowering plants, shaped by their colors, scents, and rewards. Herbivores adapted digestive systems to unlock plant chemistry, while predators evolved to hunt herbivores that gathered around vegetation. In a profound sense, plants orchestrated the rules of the evolutionary game, setting the stage on which other species play. And humans are no exception. Our diets, our medicines, even our migrations have been bound to plant life. The spread of agriculture determined where empires rose and fell. The potato sustained populations in Europe. Its failure sparked famine and political upheaval. Coffee and tea fueled global trade networks and cultural revolutions. Cotton drove the industrial age, but also slavery and colonization. Again and again, plants have not only sustained humanity, but directed its history. Recognizing this influence reframes intelligence. It is not only about neurons or conscious thought, but about the capacity to reshape environments, guide evolution, and sustain complexity. By that standard, plants are not background actors, but central strategists in the drama of life. The geopolitical implications remain profound. Nations that steward ecosystems effectively wield quiet but immense power. Control over forests, grasslands, and crop systems is not just environmental management. It is the control of rainfall, soil fertility, and biodiversity upon which regional stability depends. In the 21st century, ecological stewardship will increasingly translate into political leverage. But there is also a humbling lesson here. Plants achieve this influence not through conquest or speed, but through patience and persistence. They spread slowly, endure hardship, and stabilize systems rather than disrupt them. Their power is cumulative, not explosive, yet it has proven more transformative than any empire or technology.
And so, the recognition of plant intelligence is not only about respect, it is about perspective. To understand them is to see our place differently, not as rulers of a passive world, but as latecomers in a realm already shaped by quiet strategists. Plants were here first. They built the stage. And our survival still depends on their ongoing performance. In the race to build smarter machines, humans often look to themselves for inspiration. Artificial intelligence is modeled on the brain, neurons, networks, synapses firing in parallel. But what if we have overlooked a different model, one older, slower, and perhaps more sustainable?
The intelligence of plants may offer a blueprint for the next generation of technology. Plants, after all, excel where our machines often falter. They thrive without central control. They adapt in real time to noisy, unpredictable environments. They integrate dozens of signals, light, water, nutrients, competition, without crashing or consuming massive energy. Their intelligence is distributed, resilient, and energy efficient, qualities modern AI struggles to achieve. Consider root systems. They behave like decentralized algorithms, probing soil for resources, avoiding toxins, and adjusting strategy as conditions change. This resembles swarm intelligence, the kind used in robotics and logistics optimization. Yet plants have perfected it for millions of years, solving resource allocation problems more elegantly than most supercomputers. Or take chemical communication. Plants use volatile compounds and underground fungal networks to share information, warn of threats, and balance cooperation with competition. This mirrors the architecture of the Internet or blockchain, where information flows through decentralized nodes rather than a single authority. Failures at one point do not collapse the system. Resilience emerges from distribution. Researchers are beginning to take notice. Plant-inspired algorithms have been applied to solve network routing, optimize supply chains, and design fault-tolerant systems. Even robotics has drawn lessons from vines and tendrils, building machines that grow instead of walk, adapting shape rather than forcing motion. These technologies highlight a profound truth. Sometimes the most advanced strategies are not human inventions, but biological inheritances. The economic potential is immense. Energy-efficient computing modeled after plants could reduce the staggering power demands of AI. Decentralized architectures inspired by plant resilience could safeguard critical infrastructure from cyber attacks. In a world increasingly dependent on digital systems, learning from plants may be the key to stability. Geopolitically, the stakes are high. Nations that pioneer bio-inspired AI and resilient networks will dominate in defense, communications, and industry. Just as the digital revolution reshaped global power in the late 20th century, the green intelligence revolution could redraw influence in the 21st. The competition is not only for data, but for wisdom hidden in biology. Philosophically, this convergence forces us to reconsider what intelligence truly means. We often equate it with speed, centralization, and consciousness. But plants suggest another paradigm: patience, distribution, and sustainability. Intelligence in this light is not about domination, but about endurance. Not about consuming more, but about surviving longer. Perhaps the greatest irony is this: in our quest to build machines that think, we may find our best teachers in organisms that never move, never speak, and never sleep, but that have quietly mastered survival in ways we are only beginning to understand. Human civilization is built on speed, fast transport, instant communication, rapid consumption. We measure progress in acceleration. But plants remind us that survival often belongs not to the fastest, but to the most patient, the most adaptive, the most enduring. Their intelligence embodies a principle we have nearly forgotten: sustainability as strategy. Plants live within limits. They cannot overconsume without consequence. A tree that grows too fast becomes brittle, vulnerable to storms. A crop that flowers too early risks frost. Success is measured not in bursts, but in cycles, in the ability to persist across seasons, droughts, and centuries. This is an intelligence of restraint, a wisdom of balance. Contrast this with human systems. Our economies demand constant growth. Our technologies accelerate resource use. Our politics reward short-term gains. Yet these very impulses now push us toward ecological collapse. Rising temperatures, soil erosion, biodiversity loss, each a symptom of imbalance. In this crisis, plants offer not only oxygen and food, but a model of survival. Forests, for example, manage diversity as insurance. No single species dominates completely. Resilience comes from redundancy. If one tree falls, others take its place. If one strategy fails, another succeeds. Human societies, by contrast, often place all bets on monocultures of crops, of energy, of ideas, creating fragility that collapses under stress. To mimic plants would mean designing economies and policies that embrace diversity, redundancy, and cooperation. Agriculture, too, holds lessons. Traditional polycultures, from the three sisters of indigenous America, maize, beans, squash, to Asian rice-fish systems, mirror the cooperative strategies of natural ecosystems. These methods, sustainable for centuries, are now being validated by modern science. Plants teach us that mutual support yields resilience, while extraction and isolation lead to vulnerability. Even at the philosophical level, plants challenge our obsession with dominance. They do not conquer landscapes, they transform them quietly, making space for others. They do not seek control over all resources, they recycle, share, and negotiate. Their success is measured not in conquest, but in continuity. The cultural dimension of this wisdom is profound. Across the world, plants have symbolized patience, renewal, and balance. The oak's endurance, the bamboo's flexibility, the lotus's resilience in mud. These are not just metaphors, but reflections of strategies embedded in biology. Humanity once honored these lessons. Today, science confirms their truth. Geopolitically, the nations that internalize plant-inspired resilience may outlast those clinging to unsustainable speed. As climate shocks intensify, stability will favor those who build redundancy into food, energy, and governance, who adapt like ecosystems rather than dominate like empires. The intelligence of plants is not just ecological, it is strategic. And so, the challenge before us is not whether we can outthink plants, but whether we can learn from them. Their survival manual has been written in green across the earth for 500 million years. The question is whether humanity, with all its technology and ambition, is wise enough to read it before time runs out. If plants have shaped the past and sustain the present, then their intelligence will also define the future. Humanity's survival, and indeed the stability of the biosphere, depends on whether we learn to recognize and cooperate with the silent strategies of the green world. The next century will not be won by force or speed alone, but by integration with living systems. This begins with food. As global population surges toward 10 billion, industrial agriculture strains the planet, consuming vast water supplies, eroding soils, and releasing greenhouse gases. Yet plants already know how to farm themselves. Forests recycle nutrients endlessly. Grasslands regenerate soil through root systems deeper than skyscrapers. If we redesign agriculture to follow these models, agroecology, regenerative farming, polycultures, we align with plant intelligence instead of fighting it. Nations that embrace this shift will not only feed their people, but preserve ecosystems. Those that refuse may find themselves in cycles of famine and collapse. Energy, too, carries lessons. Plants harvest sunlight with unmatched efficiency, capturing photons and turning them into stored energy through photosynthesis. While solar panels strive to mimic this process, they remain clumsy compared to a leaf. The future may lie in bio-inspired energy systems, technologies that imitate or even integrate living photosynthetic mechanisms. The green world could become both partner and teacher in the transition beyond fossil fuels. Medicine and biotechnology are no less shaped by this intelligence. Every plant carries a library of chemical strategies evolved over millions of years, molecules designed to defend, heal, or regulate. Already, many of our most powerful drugs derive from this source. But with advanced genomic tools, we are only beginning to read the full library. Protecting plant diversity is thus not only conservation, but also future healthcare policy. The cure for tomorrow's pandemics may already exist in a rainforest or grassland, if it survives long enough to be found. At the planetary scale, plant intelligence offers resilience against climate chaos. Forests modulate rainfall, wetlands buffer floods, grasslands anchor soil. To dismantle these systems is to dismantle the Earth's stability. To protect them is to safeguard our own survival. This is not idealism, it is geopolitics. The power of nations in the 21st century may be measured not only by armies or data, but by the health of their ecosystems and the intelligence they preserve. Philosophically, cooperation with plants asks us to expand our definition of community. We speak of human rights, animal welfare, even artificial intelligence. But what of the intelligence that makes all others possible? A true ecological ethic must acknowledge plants not only as resources, but as partners in existence. They do not need our recognition to survive, but we need theirs. And here lies the paradox. Plants can endure without us. They did for millions of years before humans walked the earth. But we cannot endure without them. Our food, air, medicines, and climate are all bound to their strategies. The partnership is not optional, it is existential. The path forward, then, is clear. We must move from exploitation to collaboration, from ignorance to recognition, from conquest to coexistence. The intelligence of plants has sustained life on Earth for 500 million years. Whether it sustains humanity for another century depends on the choices we make now. For centuries, humanity overlooked the intelligence of plants. We saw them as background, as passive scenery, as resources to be harvested and consumed. Yet the evidence now compels a new vision. Plants are not mute. They sense, remember, predict, and communicate. They defend with chemistry, cooperate through networks, and calculate survival in ways that rival our most advanced machines. Their intelligence is not our own, but it is real, measurable, and indispensable. This recognition is more than science. It is a shift in perspective that touches philosophy, economics, and geopolitics. If plants compute survival through distributed strategies, then ecosystems are not just collections of individuals, but living intelligences. If forests stabilize climate through collective behavior, then their destruction is not simply environmental harm, but the dismantling of a planetary defense system. If crops carry memories of drought and stress, then our food security depends on respecting and harnessing that memory. The lessons stretch further still. Plants teach us that intelligence need not be centralized, need not be fast, need not be conscious in the human sense.
It can be slow, patient, redundant, and distributed, yet still powerful enough to shape the fate of the planet. In an age when our own systems are fragile, polarized, and prone to collapse, this may be the wisdom we most need to hear. But the urgency is undeniable. Climate change, deforestation, and ecological collapse threaten to silence the very intelligence that sustains us. If we continue on the path of exploitation, we risk cutting ourselves off from the strategies that could ensure resilience. If we listen, however, if we treat plants not as background but as partners, then a different future is possible.
A natural male narrator with a warm, friendly tone. The question is no longer whether plants are intelligent. The question is whether humanity is intelligent enough to recognize it and to act accordingly. Because in the quiet strategies of the green world lies not only the history of life on Earth, but also the blueprint for its future.